There's a term you may have heard a lot in the news lately, ANTIFA. In America, ANTIFA is frequently used to collectively describe black-clad, far-left radical activists. But in protests, ANTIFA usually are in opposition to white supremacists and neo-Nazis. What is ANTIFA, and where did this term come from? ANTIFA is short for anti-fascist, and there have been anti-fascists as long as there has been fascism. This goes back to Italy in the 1920s, when Benito Mussolini coined the term fascism. Mussolini formed and led Italy's National Fascist Party, and then used fascism, violence, racism, and brutality to establish himself as a dictator. Fascism then emerged in Germany under Hitler and the far-right Nazi Party.
In Germany, they called the new order National Socialism. In Italy, they had a shorter word, fascism.
The way that the term Antifa is sometimes used today can make it seem like it's a global entity, but there is no central organization for Antifa. Rather, there are people who come together because they oppose fascism. Some activists call themselves Antifa, and small groups may organize under the name Antifa, but not all anti-fascists around the world use that term. It's misleading to say that Antifa is some sort of large network or organization where everyone shares the same name. When Antifa is used to describe protesters today, it usually refers to people that are politically left-leaning. But when anti-fascists first emerged in Italy, they came from across the political spectrum. What brought them together was the recognition that fascism posed a unique danger to the fabric of modern society. You could even say that the Allies, the countries that united to fight fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, were in fact a coalition of Antifa because they were allies against fascism.
America hopes for peace.
Decades after World War II, during the 1970s and 1980s, there was a resurgence of both fascism and anti-fascism. Many of this period's anti-fascists mobilized through the punk rock music scene or through squatter communities, and they organized in response to the rise of neo-Nazis and white supremacist groups. More recently, in the past 10 years or so, the term Antifa seems to be popping up more and more. Revolution! And that's not a coincidence. There's been an increase in groups that are far-right extremists and that embrace neo-Nazism. They're becoming more visible, more politically active, and more of a threat to the fabric of democracy. Groups that call themselves Antifa are organizing and protesting in direct response to that. We're also seeing more anti-fascism actions recently because of the alarming trend in many governments around the world, with political figures embracing racism in lawmaking and law enforcement, and using political violence in a way that harkens to the fascist dictatorships of the past.
We're not saying that all lives don't matter, but right now we want to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter.
In the 1930s, the first generation of anti-fascists knew that fascism was terrible, but they didn't necessarily know how bad things could get under fascism. Today, we have the perspective of decades of history where we've seen fascism play out. We've seen what happens when fascist leaders are allowed to take control of a country, to erode democratic freedoms and personal freedoms, and to use political violence and racism to achieve absolute control. We know what the outcome was when that happened in Europe decades ago. For that reason, perhaps there is now a greater sense of urgency for those who are coming together to fight fascism and to oppose it at every level, to make sure that the horrors of the past can never happen again.